Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody. This is a big milestone on a journey that started 12 months ago in partnership with DWP as we were working on one of our 6 work streams around their future market strategy. This one being, the predicated to this one being recruitment, which is a part of a series of wider initiatives, including the IEP Talent Academy and our online LMS provider to Simple Learn, with representatives on the call today. So I'm really pleased to welcome those. The report has been commissioned by the IEP in partnership with Aptem, and you'll hear from Richard from Aptem in a moment. We do genuinely believe there's an urgent need for data and direction in our sector, targeting the right areas of delivery, of engaging with people and getting the right people into the sector. Look, the simple thing is, we know the sector will grow over the next couple of years by estimated 40 to 60,000 practitioners, with 90% of those coming from sectors that have a relatable skill set, but no actual fundamental experience in employability. Now's the time to get the search and the engagement of those individuals right, supporting the UK economy to get back on track and to make sure that we enable tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people return to work to play an active part in the economic recovery for our country. The IEP takes a lead role in this alongside our partners and, of course, our members, who are practitioners at all levels of practice within organisations. The session today will discuss this exciting new report and dig into the detail, giving exclusive first access to the authors, Andy and Duncan, on the call today. We will also have a great opportunity to ask questions at the end in our Q&A session. So let me introduce Andy and Duncan, who will be with you in a moment, talking through the report. But firstly, I want to ask Richard from Aptem to say a few words. Aptem have, alongside the IEP, commissioned this report, and he's going to talk about Aptem and why they engaged with the report. And Aptem are the organisation that have spearheaded this project. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much. You know, on behalf of myself and also my colleagues, we really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. It's so important. You know, by way of a bit of background, before I got into the sector, in fact, my first introduction to the sector was when my company designed selection systems for very large organizations. And one of our clients was Royal Mail. And part of the challenge was, out of the 500,000 or so applicants a year they got, were a large number of people who didn't necessarily want to work there, but were being forced to apply there by the welfare to work system of the day. This is going back quite a few years. And they wanted a mechanism by which they could select those who really wanted to work there versus those who perhaps were applying for other reasons. And that was the first time I came across this sector. And now I've spent 10 years learning more and more about what a fascinating arena this is and the challenges we have. And from the global financial crisis, which threw up a very particular cadre of job seeker and was driven by a very particular problem that would go away quite quickly, we suddenly find ourselves in an altogether different type of recession and requirement. So a decade ago, there was growth in unemployment and some pretty good technology around generally. You know, 10 years ago, systems were developed, but not necessarily in this space. And therefore, many providers were for the first time starting to use technology, but very much at the case management side of things, rather than necessarily thinking about it from the job seeker perspective, job seeker portals, and not really employing many of the techniques that other sectors had used to great effect in terms of scalable technology solutions to the problems they were addressing. You know, we at Aptem were very much at the forefront of innovation, really looking at how you could scale delivery in a sector where the only other mechanism to do large-scale provision was hiring and training lots of people. And indeed, quite interesting in the terms of what we're looking at today. You know, when I look at the concept of what makes the idea of when you have advisor of the year awards and people coach of the year and people talk about that's a brilliant coach. To me that rankles, and it rankles because the implication of having a brilliant coach is most other people aren't that good. You've got an inconsistency. You've essentially got, this is a brilliant coach, and boy, are you going to be lucky if you get that person. This is a really bad coach, and probably next week they're not going to work here anymore. And then you've got a distribution in between of people who do somewhere between okay-ish to pretty good to eventually the handful of brilliant people. And that's the nature of human delivery. And the challenge in scaling up quickly is it becomes ever more difficult to find out where are your better coaches going to come from and how quickly can you fast track them. Technology, on the other hand, is an area where R&D, it takes a lot of cost and effort to build, but once built, it scales really well. It's inherently data-driven. And in this era where distance delivery matters, it lends itself to a distance delivery model in a way that human capability doesn't do so well. So we've been spending a lot of time thinking about how do you introduce personalization, but using automation to do that? How do you nudge more effectively? How do you constantly just try and turn the needle by a few percent here and a few percent there, using data to iterate and improve? Boy, we're facing a big problem, as the country opens up. I would have said a few days ago, as the country opens up again, let's park that idea for a few weeks. But as the country starts to contemplate reopening at some point and saying, how do we help the X million? And no one quite knows what X is going to be as a number. How do we start helping the X million back into work? We're going to need huge numbers of advisors who provide that human dimension to complement what I hope technology such as ours, and we're not the only provider in this space, but what technology such as ours can do in terms of the scalability, the management, the automation, the data-driven insights. Those are the areas that people like us will be working on. But you're going to need advisors who can use this technology, can provide the empathy, who can provide the coaching skills, who can provide the wisdom, who can provide the motivation. I mean, how demoralizing will it be for a person when 3 months in, no one bothers replying to their applications and they just feel like they're hitting their head against a brick wall and they're not going to get anywhere? And those are the problems that won't be solved by technology, they'll be solved by coaches. So it's brilliant to be involved with this piece of research that can help you, as you start to say, how do we scale up our businesses to actually provide these services? So thank you for the opportunity.
That's great. Thank you, Richard, for your insights. And can I say how great it's been to work with you and the team at Aptem on this project? And yeah, so thank you very much for that. It's been a real eye-opener, and I'm really excited to finally bring the information that we've been able to glean through the research to the wider world. So without further ado, as it were, over to you, Andy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. I trust you can hear me okay and see the slides all right. Thumbs up, Scott. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, it's an absolute pleasure, and a massive thank you to the both of you, Richard and Scott, and your organizations for supporting this work. Scott and I have been talking for some time, or should I say I've been indoctrinating Scott for some time around the wonderful world of labor market intelligence and information and data. And it's great to start to really bring some of that to life in a practical way. So thank you very much for the opportunities. So the goal today is for us to kind of share a little bit of the background to the research. You will receive the report at some point if you haven't already done so, and so you'll be able to read the details for yourself. But we wanted to just bring that to life a little and just discuss with you some of the kind of the philosophy and thinking behind this, a bit of background as to the methodology, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague who leads our consulting and economics team, Duncan Brown, to talk through some of the findings before we then open it up to the floor to ask some questions, and hopefully we can clarify a few points or lean into some more specifics for you. So a little bit about our approach I'll kick off with and then hand over to Duncan. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Emsi, thought it'd be helpful to give you the context of who we are and what we do as to why we are hopefully well placed to support this great challenge, opportunity in as we face some disruptive times in the labour market right now. We at Emsi are really passionate about helping organizations and ultimately then the individuals they serve make better, more informed choices about the labor market. And so our mission is to really bring together the best data that we can find that is available and connect it together and empower different key agents of change in the labor market to be more informed about what is happening so that they can align their services, support, and as Richard says, embrace the humans in this process to work with technology to focus on what's most important and what will get the best results. We do this through pulling together a wide range of data from different sources, ranging from official statistics that help us understand the building blocks to the economy, through to big data sources like job postings and profile-based analytics that really illuminate the detail and the weeds of what's going on. And more recently have invested significant time and effort globally on really starting to illuminate the labor market, not just in terms of the kind of sectors and occupations and job roles per se, but actually start to think about the labor market very much in skill terms, what skills are driving the economy and demand in the economy. And we focus really on bringing this data to three core audiences: the worlds of education, economic development, and workforce and employment planning, with a view to really enabling people in these areas to serve their communities, whether they be the unemployed, whether that be future talent, young people coming through the education system, or whether that be about developing the current workforce as it is, to ensure that it aligns with where the opportunities are for our nation. And it is on this skills point that we've really lent in to this research as we unlock that. And so let me just tell you a little bit about the why behind that. So as we see it, ultimate challenge is to help people who find good work, employers find the people they need and the skills that they seek, and the education system, however broadly you might define it, to ensure that we can connect these together. And it's really skills that lay at the heart of this system. So what we've done at Emsi over the last year or so is really work hard to think about how do we define and illuminate what skills demand looks like in the labor market. And we've actually built a skills library that is open source, free to access, and you've got the website there if you want to learn more about that skills library, to really define and understand what skills are most in demand from an employer's perspective. And we're gathering that from a range of data sources, particularly the job postings derived analytics, and really trying to understand what are those key skills that employers are seeking. And so we built this library. It has around about 30,000 skill terms in them. And the goal is to really make that interoperable and connect to lots of different data sources and data sites to really help make that connection at that skill level. By being an open source service, we want people to speak that language and help them facilitate those connections. And we're building a really engaged community who are contributing ideas and thoughts into that as we refine and develop that. One of the key parts to our approach is that this library is being updated every 2 weeks as we go. So the goal is to reflect real contemporary changes in the labor market back into how we visualize and define skill demand. So that's a little background as to who we are and some of the work we're doing in skills. Why have we been pressing on this research, and why? What's the point, basically? Well, ultimately, I've got 3 goals in mind. With the challenge that Scott set out, with the need to scale the community, the advisor community, one of the things we wanted to first ask is, well, how do we define the advisor community? What skills are what skills define that role, what skills are critical to that role, and how do we define and differentiate an advisor in an employability setting, so that we've got a base point to work from. Once we can identify and understand and define that skills profile, it then allows us to look to the wider labour market to find other types of roles that have very similar skills profiles, because that would be the logical place, the next nearest proximate part of the labour market, to think about where we might bring that scale to the labour market, and ultimately then drive these talent and recruitment pipelines, focusing where the gap is least. But of course, understanding what that gap looks like and making sure that there are interventions, and the work the IEP have been doing on building out induction programs and other education structures around supporting the sector, of course, that really help to bridge those gaps. But obviously, the goal is to find where those gaps are smallest, to enable us to scale, and not just scale, but scale at pace as well, as the challenge emerges in our wider labour market. So in terms of the research and the report that we pulled together, step one was very much around defining that skill profile of an advisor. And as a labour market economics firm, we wanted to root this in strong data analysis. So we started off by actually looking at the sector's recent hiring activity and seeing what we can glean from organizations who are hiring employability advisors and how they defined the skills that they were seeking. And we can benefit from a large volume of hiring activity over a good period of time to really build out a broad view of all the different skills that were being sought. Now, when you run through that analysis, you realize that there's a lot of skills that are being sought and very specific ways of defining that labour market. So a massive thank you to Scott and his IEP expertise to really help us refine that big list and really start to work out what are critical core skills that really define an advisor versus what are slightly broader skills that might be slightly more common in the labour market, that yes, are really important, but don't necessarily differentiate for this setting. And so that allowed us to really refine a prioritised list of skills connected into that Emsi skills library that I mentioned earlier. And we divided into two categories: the core skills, which really are those specific technical skills that are very critical to the role, and then supporting skills grouped into a few buckets here: management skills, people skills, organization skills, that are more generally descriptive of the types of activities that are undertaken, but you find those quite commonly in other parts of the labour market as well. So we're able to kind of start to refine and shape what we think an advisor looks like in skill terms. Of course, once we've defined that, we can start looking back to the wider labour market. And the joy of using a common skills language, of course, is that we bring that skills language to the wider labour market. And we have a universe of job postings that we're tracking on a daily and monthly basis that aggregates up to around about 40 million unique postings now, since we've started collecting them in January 2016. And all of the job postings that we're finding, we're tagging with Emsi skills and with standard job titles, so we can start to see where those, so we can look to that universe and start to understand where do we find those core advisor skills elsewhere in the labour market. And we used a method that allowed us to really focus hard and weight the core skills as being very, very much specific to the setting, but also in, understanding some of the broader skills as well that are more transferable and common skills. And that enabled us to refine a set of matches. But one of the things that we were thinking through as we looked at that list initially was it was still quite a broad range of roles. And actually, the purpose and the goal of the research here is to think about logical talent pipelines into the sector. But of course, undertaking that same analysis also can reflect on potential pipelines beyond the sector as well and out of the sector, which is not necessarily what we were trying to solve here. So what we thought was sensible was to apply a salary limit based on what your typical upper end of an advisor earnings profile is, so that we can make sure we can see a route through into into the sector, and that sector represents an opportunity for individuals to grow their earnings capacity as well, because that's obviously going to make it a very attractive move to be making. So that's the process we went through. And then once we've made those connections, we can then start to look at that proximate labour market to start to think about the different dynamics at play that might influence further prioritization or actually start to shape our engagement and targeting strategy. So a few dimensions that we explored here were thinking about recent hiring trends. So when we look at that cohort, how active is this labour market? Is it one that's been growing or shrinking? Is it one that's fairly steady, or is it quite volatile? That gives us a clue as to some of the dynamics at play that we might need to consider. Who typically has been hiring and to any kind of volume, because that will help us understand, I suppose, two things. One, where we might seek candidates from, and secondly, understanding who we are competing with in that broader labour market context. So those are really important factors to understand. And we can develop that a little further to actually think in more broader terms, where is this workforce typically held in sector terms? So again, thinking about sector specific targeting, but also it's at this point we can start to think about the wider labour market challenge that we're facing right here, right now, to understand whether there are whether there's a good volume of potential advisor workers held in sectors that are currently facing disruption, and therefore we can offer a positive outcome for those challenged sectors. And then also then a key dynamic, of course, in all of this, as I mentioned earlier, is thinking about advertised earnings. So will moving into the advisor space actually offer up an earning progression, and to what extent might that be? Again, thinking about attraction into the industry. And then finally, a big focus for us in the work that we do is really about providing a geographic lens and thinking about where this labour market is currently in demand, and where is this labour market required? Do they tie up or not? Because that's going to be an important factor. And of course, as we start to think about, we're thinking here in aggregate, but of course each different region will have its own activity and focus and scale requirements, and so we can start to really target and localize accordingly. So the goal of this third step really is about illuminating what is happening in that wider labour market to help prioritise yet further. So that's the process we went through. So now I'd like to hand over to Duncan, Emsi Senior Economist, to talk us through some of those key findings. So I'll try and keep up with you as I press through.
Absolutely. And I should say at this point that I'm mainly here to take the credit because my colleague Natasha did most of the hard work here. So she should get that credit, really. So as Andy was just saying, what we did was quite a lot of work to work out the sort of the range of skills that were found densely in the sort of the postings from employment services providers. And then we used that as a basis for a bit of a sifting process and then a grouping process that we did with Scott at IEP. And we ended up with this broad skills profile where we've got two main buckets, core skills and supporting skills, and each of those with their subcategories. And it's important to say that these give us a kind of long list in each case, because the average job posting, as you can imagine, doesn't have this many skills mentioned in it in a meaningful way. You know, typically it's sort of we identify, I don't know, something like 20 to 40 different skill items in a job advert of a professional type, and so it's actually picking out those that are getting enough of these that we can see that they're kind of getting close to the kind of profile that we're after, and that was why the grouping structure was important. So if you go on one, please, Andy. So first of all, what we wanted to do was just work out what kinds of jobs we were finding really. And so in our data, in our job postings data, we not only code them all by the official occupation taxonomy, SOC, which you're probably all very well aware of, but we also have our own job title taxonomy as well. And that's a lot richer. It's got thousands and thousands of job titles in there, much more detailed. And so on the left-hand side, we got those that matched with the sorts of the core skills that we saw there, which we're more demanding of. We required more of those to be found. And there's quite an interesting mix of people who work with people in the main. So employment specialists and placement specialists and career specialists in the middle there. But you've also got roles like probation officers who really do work with people, often in quite difficult circumstances. Crisis workers, care managers, same applies there. Ministry leaders, we are a transatlantic company, and therefore ministry leaders in this case refers not to cabinet ministers, but people who are leading in churches, who are also helping people to get on in life as well. And then on the secondary matches side, as you can imagine, this ends up with a lot wider spread. So we've got people who are in kind of much more technical roles like finance officers and identity management engineers, because these are kind of branching skills that we're talking about here. But you also get some of the similar kinds of cases occurring: training managers, zone managers there, and training leaders, and crisis workers and probation officers also creeping in as well. So quite a wide spread. And I should say the size of the bar here is how close the match is. So on the left hand side there, you see probation officers typically have the most skills matching the core skills category really. So quite demanding in terms of those kind of skills. So if you go on another slide. So on the left hand here, what we looked at was the monthly trend of how many job postings arrived that matched that skills profile over time. And as you can see, because it's quite a demanding requirement to match across those 5 different buckets of skills, we end up with a relatively sort of niche labour market, but one that has grown quite significantly over the past few years. And so job postings increased about 34% since the start of 2016. Has fallen back a bit. You'll see at the end of the line there, but that's in common with recruitment more generally since the lockdown commenced earlier this year. And then on the right hand side, we'll look at the kind of companies that are recruiting for this profile of skills. And reassuringly, we get some of the leading employment services companies. So we can see people like Reading Partnership and Maximus on there, amongst others. But then we've also got quite a wider mix, quite a lot of public service bodies and bodies that are helping individuals with their sort of social problems. The NHS is in there. We've got recruitment agents in there, Eagle Cliff at the top there. And so quite a wide mix of organisations, including the employment services, but going beyond it, because that reflects what we're doing here. We're looking for an employability advisor skills profile that isn't restricted to those that are currently recruiting, but is looking at the kind of people that, the kind of jobs that require those kinds of skills. Go on to the next one, please, Andy. And so another thing that we can do is we can convert that data back into the official occupations, or SOC. And at Emsi, we maintain a staffing pattern. So that reads occupations into industries, basically. We say, well, so if you've got a job, what kind of industries is that job found in? And so because of that, we can take those occupations that employability advisor skills are found in and look at the kind of industries that do hire them. And the one at the top there, reassuringly, is employment activities. So again, it's kind of suggesting that we're in the right space. Those that are at the top, again, are that wider range of jobs that are people helping people. So social work activities without accommodation. So that's, people giving help in the community, education, then residential care, public administration. So that would include people like job centres and so on. But then you're getting into a much more diverse pool of organisations, really. So you're getting into head offices, the health service, financial services, because of course a lot of the skills that are in that skills profile are valuable soft skills, things like business development and maintaining relationships, things like that. So they are in demand across quite a wide range. And so as you go down that list, you find more and more diverse range of activities. But at the top, and I think that this is the critical point, the industries which are where there are roles which are about helping individual beneficiaries are where the action really is. Go on.
Duncan, if I could just jump in, I think the interesting thing, as I mentioned in the setup, I suppose, for this section is this point we can maybe start to, and whilst we haven't necessarily in the report, certainly we think one of the uses of the report is to bring these findings to life through what we're hearing is going on, quite frankly, out there in the labour market. And so there are various elements of short-term data like furlough type data that are giving us clues as to where there is right here, right now, short-term disruption happening. And so if we think about employment activities, it's quite an interesting mixed bag in terms of a large number of agencies actually furloughed a lot of staff when hiring activity dropped off a cliff. And whilst it's picking up, it's not necessarily picking up in a uniform way, where there might be certain sector focused recruitment agencies that are considering redundancies in a way that in other sectors they might be going gangbusters right now because other parts of the economy are really picking up. So there's a bit of a clue in that, and I don't know if you want to talk to that and maybe some of the others.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, this kind of data can start us thinking about various pools of talent which may become available, but are also relevant to the kinds of skills that we're seeking to hire for. And so, yeah, I mean, if you think about the wider recruitment space, we know from our wider data, not really in this report, that recruitment is recovering a lot better in some sectors than in others. You know that there are some industries, and we know from all around us, that say the sort of the hotel and accommodation industry is still greatly struggling. If you have been working in recruitment and serving that kind of industry, then your employment prospects at the moment are much more difficult than if you're finding computer programmers for people, because actually the demand is probably increasing for a lot of those kind of services. So absolutely, and understanding what kind of industries, and we'll go on to locations as well, can all be quite useful in thinking about where you can source potential candidates that will meet the kind of skills.
And on the flip side, of course, if you look at residential care, you look at human health activities there towards the top, of course, there's unbelievable demand in those services, as there always has been and always will be, quite frankly, but that might not quite be such a fertile politically area to be trying to recruit from.
Absolutely. Whereas education, there is a lot of talk about the sort of the disruption in the higher education space, and so a lot of roles that may be under risk there, and that may represent happier hunting for recruiting into this environment. So and so another thing that we're able to do, because this is based on a data set that looks at online job postings, is that around about 3 in 5 online job ads have salary data in them, which is a pretty reasonable rate. And from that, we've been able to extract the typical offered salary, and we offer that sort of blue ribbon in the background because there's not a lot of postings involved here, and so it's just to give a sense of the sort of the underlying trend. And offered salaries have increased a little bit over time, and have remained in that sort of £30,000 to £35,000 bracket for jobs that are seeking these kind of skills. And you can see on the right there, we've extracted the sort of the medians for each of the individual title involved. So and they range from crisis workers at around the £20,000 mark, of course, often driven more by vocation than by sort of a pure labour market, up to probation officers in the early 30s there. And then, as I was mentioning a moment ago, another dimension of where to think about recruitment is location. And so what we've done here is we've plotted where these job postings are found that meet the skills profile. And so on the left here, we look at it in terms of total volumes. And you can see that it's kind of dominated by the larger cities. You'll see a little yellow dot in central London there, which is because a lot of these jobs tend to get advertised in London. And so it's quite difficult to locate them, but they're there or thereabouts, and the big cities are there. More interesting is this chart on the right, where we look at these postings that match the skills profile per 100,000 postings overall. So this is a density measure, and so it isn't geographically related. And so there's a couple of interesting outliers there, one in Lincolnshire and then one down in Sevenoaks, which tend to have a real concentration of these, but it is a much more varied pattern than just looking at the raw volumes. And it shows that these kinds of demands do exist across the country, and therefore the workers probably do as well that do them. And so again, combining this with industries gives us good information on where to target recruitment activity. And that's us on that.
Thank you very much, Duncan. That's really, really interesting. We've got a couple of points in the chat already, and I encourage everybody now to take your opportunity to put in the chat, and we will ask on your behalf anything that you have for Duncan, Andy, Richard, or myself. But whilst we're waiting for people to do that, Duncan, I think there were a couple, well, there was one wonderfully flippant observation there that the employability sector is growing massively in that analysis, and it was the highest percentage growth rate, and I think it's understated as well. Clearly, I think there is a lot more that is likely to come. But I was really buoyed by the fact that people operating in a membership area was the second growth area. So that bodes really well for both our sector, I suppose, and the IEP in general, if that's what we mean by membership area, which I'm sure it is. There was a point made earlier by Deborah, and I'm just going to find the chat because I think it was important, and I want you to also pick up on this, Andy, if you would, or Duncan. I think the one thing that I wanted to say to Deborah was that this is genuinely a starting point. So this is rationalizing with creating the most opportunity to understand what it takes to bring people into the sector, based on the fact, as I did in my introduction, that probably 90% of those people that are going to come into the sector and fill these volume vacancies will have never done this before. So it's in essence our benchmark, our starting point, our milestone to enable us to do that. But I think her point is incredibly well made. So if I just read it to you, it's quite long. And Deborah is a very often avid attender at our membership sessions and also our webinars. So she said the report talks about two groups, those hardest to help and job ready. These are two very different groups. I don't think we would disagree with that, and have a very different expectations of the support they receive and the nature of the support that they will require or engage with. Absolutely agree. Very many disengage with the support at too low a level, or if it has no understanding of the occupational experience and expertise that the job seeker has already. This is far more than just looking at a job title. And I think that was the point I was making about this being a start. What about the timeline of support and the need to be able to deal with extremely distressed individuals and understand some of the complex societal issues they face? So if we stop it there, I mean, my answer to that was this was the starting point. And what we're not doing is analysing the quality of practice. What we're doing is analysing where to find these bodies from to fill in the vacancies. I don't know whether you've got a comment there, Andy or Duncan, who wants to come in.
Yeah, I'll come in on that one. I mean, first of all, I would say that that's why we also added the quality sort of assurance process with yourself anyway, so that we weren't just doing it on the basis of, sort of garbage in, garbage out of what people are asking for. We did actually allow some kind of sifting there. But I think that the wider point is entirely well made, and that what we're doing here is we're looking at the profile of skills that are valuable in this space, and that if you've got them, then you've possibly got a contribution to make. And in terms of some of those kind of hardest to help situations, some of those skills are mentioned, things like family support and crisis management and development interventions and mentorship and things like that, so that they are sort of included in consideration. But I think the wider point is that, just building on what you said there, Scott, that this gives you a sort of a sifting mechanism to sort of see, well, what kind of jobs are people who have these kinds of skills in there. But it isn't the whole story. It isn't like, if you've got one of these jobs, then therefore you must make a good employability advisor. I'm obviously a big advocate for data, given where I work and what I do, but data doesn't replace human judgment, and all the normal aspects of recruitment are still essential to really consider that you're getting the right kind of people, and then also that you're managing them in the right way and creating the model that allows them to make the necessary interventions. And one thing I would just add is that the point about the two groups is really interesting, because of course the sort of the big growth sadly is likely to be in the job ready category, actually, in the sort of the months ahead, because of course it's the kind of the sort of loss of employment for people who have actually been in relatively stable situations. And so that is just something worth considering in the same discussion as well.
Yeah, and on that point, I think as you've got we've looked fairly generally and tried to cast our net relatively wide to kind of come up with some hopefully meaningful prioritization shortcuts. But I think to that point, we're not just assuming an employability advisor is a very specific thing that gets put into a very specific box. We're looking at the breadth, and actually the types of groups that you will be working with will need for you to pull on different skills to different levels. Those that are more job ready in terms of your kind of caseload and the cohort you're engaging with might need quite a different type of intervention than those further from the labour market, and so we'll need a different skill set in the advisor. Richard, sorry, you were going to jump.
Richard, thank you. Andy.
No, all I just was struck by an experience I had many years ago, back in, again, my previous business, where we designed selection systems. One of our clients was Courtaulds, big factory, manufacturing clothing, actually largely M&S knickers with lace on. And their problem was they employed large numbers of piece workers who needed to do this work. Now, this involved fine dexterity, fine detail. It was something that was paid for by piecework. It was a job where you were largely sat down and actually chatting to other people while you were doing the task at hand. And what they discovered was ex-hairdressers. Hairdressers had that dexterity. A lot of them, after a while, either didn't want to roll where they were standing up all the time, and also you tended to get finger infections just from the nature of hairdressing work. So suddenly what they realized is they could tap into an entirely different base of people who had the core skills that they required, people who you wouldn't automatically associate with this role. And I think that's what this research can help to reveal, is where, we are going to be hiring tens of thousands of people who weren't doing this job 6 months ago. By definition, they weren't. 6 months ago, we didn't have that many people. This sector was a lot smaller. So where are you going to find those people? And then the challenge of the IAG and how you upskill people to know the task itself. Well, you can teach people stuff. The question is, do they have the underlying human characteristics to A, be effective, and B, to get a kick out of the job such that they'll want to stay in it, or will they want to jump ship the moment they possibly can because it's not the job for them? And let's face it, if you're equipping them with someone with the skills to advise on job search, you would assume that if anyone's capable of finding a new job, it may well be some of your advisors, if this isn't the job that they enjoy doing.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's really important and beautifully segues into Marion's point, actually, which states, given the skills and knowledge required in the sector, what are your thoughts on the need for training and IG skills, motivation and resilience? And I can answer this. I think they are fundamental to the ability of individuals to practice well within this sector. And I feel a bit like the Blue Peter model. Here's one I made earlier. All of those elements are included in the IEP accredited sector induction and all of the other learning opportunities that we have through the Institute. So yes, it's required, and I know where you can get it from. So in essence, that's true. And there was another point about pay scales by Deborah. And you're absolutely right. I mean, this is an area and a sector where the ability of people is so paramount to the success of other people. that we need to make sure that individuals are valued, trained and developed and supported incredibly well. The challenge is that that hasn't necessarily always been the case. And so if you look at the pay scale, it moves from 20 through to 35,000. Now, there are people in our sector that are earning as practitioners towards that upper end of that, but there are also an awful lot of people who are earning towards the lower end of that salary scale. And it's up to us as a movement, as a combined entity, to continue to prove the value, the economic and social worth of practitioners in this space, and to enable commissioners, organizations, governments to fund activity effectively, and thus, in essence, that providers fund activity, fund salaries effectively, and continue to build that value within those businesses.
And hopefully, Scott, obviously the research in the report gives you an evidence base to be lobbying on that cause, because now the whole point of this type of analysis is to try and move away from our very focused specific domains and think about things in more broader labor market comparable terms, and so hopefully by bringing some of these comparisons to like and that connection across in more of a skill language, which you can find more commonality across different roles, maybe paints that picture quite acutely as to the pay scales that you as employability advisors and those recruiters of employability advisors are having to compete with other similar types of roles, seeking very similar skills that are able or willing to pay more. And in a market as the labor market is, the price can be a big determinant as to where people find themselves in that labor market.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point, Andy, and it is quite disparate in terms of those where individuals are either valued or able to be as valued as they would like to be within that dynamic. And we've got to remember that the employability sector is so multifaceted, is so present in so many different areas. I mean, you've proven a considerable part of that point today. So it's very different operating in an FE college as it is operating in a employability-based provider, or in a skills-based service, or in a fundamental careers-based service. It's just a very different dynamic. And we're touching on all of these, or in a social care capacity, or in a healthcare capacity. So we've got to look at the wide picture here to start to then potentially narrow down over these days. Now, Patrick Craven, who is your friend and mine, from City and Guilds, he's made quite a significant point here about the difference in the profiles. I think he's agreeing with Deborah absolutely, and the polarized cohorts, and then I think the skills bridge work, which you guys are working on at the moment, which is fantastic, is really important to that dynamic. And I think the final point he makes is we'll be faced with a flood of the latter group, which is the job ready group. That's Duncan's point, in the next few months, which is in danger of drowning the former group, which is those that are furthest from the labour market, in essence. And I think it's a really important point. I don't know whether you or Duncan or Richard have anything to say on that point.
Certainly. Hey, Paddy, good to hear from you. Thanks a lot for contributing. So I think the big part of some of the thinking behind this work was twofold, actually. One was to help illuminate the very specific focus of the research, which was around really defining and understanding the advisor market, and therefore seeking where there is proximity in the labor market. But also secondarily, this is a great example of what a number of us believe we need to be doing with that latter group more openly, in terms of really understanding the skills that an individual candidate brings based on their education and work history, and find those connections back to the wider labour market where there is demand. And the work City and Guilds are doing around skills bridges is an example of that. The idea is to assess an individual's skill set and find routes into high demand sectors, and critically think about just the upskilling required to move, as opposed to thinking about the traditional route of big full qualifications that are expensive to undertake, time and take time, resources. So I think, what we're hopefully proving within the sector is what can be achieved by the sector with the right data and thought process, for sure. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
Thanks, Andy. That's really good. And we've only got about 5 minutes left, so I've got thick and fast comments and questions. I'll come back to Liz's question in a minute, because I think it's really, really important and not something that we've analyzed as part of this data, because it would be impossible in this thing. But I also don't want to go too far down the line of salary expectation and things, because I think it's a much wider piece of work around value. But I think Amanda's point around what the sector has got to offer in the long term to retain good people, and we at the IEP understand the value of practice, but we also understand that we work in a provision market sector around economic cycles. We know that, and this economic cycle at the moment is worse downturn than many because of the added complexity of COVID. But we were waiting for a Brexit bump or a cyclical recession anyway, and so we work in that environment. All I will say to you, Amanda, is that we have now the ability, the resource, and the intention to actually start to talk about how we, alongside organisations, how we make sure that practitioners are valued, supported, how their skills ebb and flow throughout the process of this economic cycle, and how, as much as we possibly can do, how we won't see that movement away from the sector per se, as we did potentially after work programme and the increasing prosperity of our country. So watch this space, really, in essence, Amanda, and if it's something you want to be involved in, we'd be really, really keen to work with you. Okay, I'm just looking for any other questions here. Deborah's saying she's already experienced, look, how's a lot of flood of job-ready customers rolling off the furlough and being made redundant. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more of that to come, definitely.
Scott, can I make one
Yes,
quick point? Some of you know I'm co-founder with Sean Williams of Corndell. And Corndell's a model, first of all, in apprenticeships, but now obviously we're half of Adecco Working Ventures. But our entire business model was using technology to drive so much of the sort of back office pain in the neck stuff. We paid our, as we call them, PDEs, essentially tutors, twice the market rate. We launched paying twice the market rate for our PDEs. And on the back of that, but could just as easily be people who are job seekers, we gave a really good experience, achieved really good results, and we became the fastest growing firm in the apprentices sector. Now, that was done with really good people, but we could afford to pay really well because they weren't wasting a lot of their stuff doing things that technology does for them cheaply. And I think this mindset of let's just hire people as cheaply as we can to do the job, you know, it kind of produces the same old results it always did, and unfortunately will in future. And I think this, you know, if we think about the problem differently and hire really good people, they will have a better impact on those they're trying to assist. And that will in itself set up a virtuous circle that's beneficial. And that's how you square the problem of how do we afford the people we need.
I also, just to add to that, Richard, I also think, you know, with work that we're involved with and aware of through NIST's Career Tech Challenge and other partners that we're working with, given the nature of that second group, as we call it, actually there's potentially going to be a lot of helping people help themselves and using technology at the front end, such that expert skilled advisors, as we've just tried to define them in more general terms, can spend their time where they can have the greatest impact, and so we can hit scale, but ensure that the human resource is used to its greatest effect, which I think is an extension, Richard, of exactly what you were describing, which is let the humans do what they do best and technology fulfill some of the more menial tasks.
Basically.
Repeatable, scalable tasks.
Just got a, I don't think we can answer this on the call, but I think the question, got a couple of questions, one from Jamie, which I hope I'm going to get to, but if not, we can do something again. But what's the value of lived experience, Liz Saul says, and I think we would all concur, it's massively valuable, but not something we can analyze through this process at this moment in time. What we're doing is looking at skills, and lived experience, unfortunately, is not I mean, I'm stating the obvious, it's not a skill, but it is fundamentally important to people's all-round ability and understanding of the role.
It's an application of the skill,
yeah,
as opposed to the skill itself. Yeah.
I thought you'd say it a lot better than me, Andy. That's absolutely fine. Look, we've run out. Jamie had a really interesting question. We might need to leave hanging there. How much do you think this will hamper training opportunities for those new to the sector when people are recruiting to contract? So ultimately, this is this bit and this is that bit. And I would say, look, the IEP is there to support you, Jamie. You know, there's lots and lots of learning opportunities there at every part of individual practitioner's journey. And if the learning isn't available, you tell us what you need and we'll make sure that it happens. That's really important. We've come to the end, unfortunately. We only had an hour for this, and I know people will have to get back to work. So just really, really quickly, thank you to everyone that contributed. If you want to contribute more to this debate or any other debate, join our members' sessions every fortnight on a Friday, or if you're a fellow, join the fellows sessions. Get involved with the webinars, get hold of the report. Let's have an open channel of debate and communication here. Let's have these questions going backwards and forwards, because they will formulate the next stage of this. When that next stage will be, we'll work it out. But in essence, it will formulate the next stage in which direction this needs to go in now. As I said to you on my opening remarks, this is about 1/5 of the way along the line to really understanding what this is, but it's a very, very good start. Okay. I would like to thank everyone that's contributed to the chat. I'm sorry if I've missed people. I know Kevin and James Cheshire made a number of points there, and I know Deborah's made a number of points as well, and Deborah and I can pick that up. She's actively engaged with the IEP on a very regular basis. Can I thank Andy and Duncan, and not to forget Natasha from Emsi. Thank you, Duncan, for that. It was really good of you, because I was going to do that as well. For putting all the hard graft into getting this report over the line and to giving us a start, and really, really need to kind of crack on with this. Can I also thank Richard from Aptem for assisting us in commissioning this report and making sure that it became a reality? Can I thank Helen for producing this today from the IEP? And thank you to you all from the IEP, and we'll catch up with you very, very soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.